Good afternoon. Thank you for joining this, this expert panel number 3, the Converging Climate and Bioeconomy Agendas in Africa. That's our topic. I'm Joachim von Braun. I am going to chair and moderate this session. I'm with the Center for Development Research at Bonn University and a co-chair of the Malabo-Montpellier panel that focuses on African food systems and agriculture transformation. That is housed in Academia 2063, that is a partner in this panel here. Another partner is ICP, the International Center for Insect Physiology and Ecology, which actually was critical in organizing the first Global Bioeconomy Summit held in Africa in October last year. A mastermind behind that is Julius Ekuru. Julius is not yet in the room because he has to give an opening speech in another panel. He will walk in and will surprise us with closing remarks of substance. I'm sure this will work out well. Climate and bioeconomy agendas, bringing them together, is our issue. Addressing climate issues requires essentially 3 things: mitigation, adaptation, and societal transformation. M-A-S-T, MAST is the abbreviation. Not doing mitigation, not bending the warming curve, will lead to disaster. Not investing in adaptation for resilience of people will most seriously affect the poorest part of world population. So we have to have this combined approach, and we believe bioeconomy can address all 3 aspects: the mitigation, the adaptation, and the societal transformation aspects. The societal transformation aspects relate to consumption, redirecting economic strategies, and so on. So this panel focuses on transforming the climate policies, the impact on the agri-food systems. We will also address nutrition here, the demand side opportunities. We have wonderful panelists who I will introduce as they step to the podium. We will make sure that you have time from the audience to interact with our panelists, so they will be very brief. A little bit more time we will give to our opening speaker, Dr. Getao Tadesse. He is Director for Operational Analysis of Academia 2063, based in Kigali, Rwanda. Getao was also a senior staff member at the Center for Development Research at some point, and he has a PhD from the University of Norway, the University for Science and Technology of Norway. Getao, you will also refer to the new annual Trends and Outlook report, and you just come from the meetings in Uganda related to the revisions, the updating of the CAADP agenda, which heads of state of Africa have subscribed to last week. Getao, you have the floor. Please come here and inform us. A warm welcome to Getao.
Thank you, Professor von Braun. And I have few slides to talk about how the climate change and the bioeconomy agenda in Africa is converging. So, you know, in Africa, I will be talking a little bit about how they're being integrated into the African agricultural development programs and strategies. I think I should use my...
Yeah, you should use this.
Yes. Yes. I think most of you know that in Africa, everything is looked at from, from the policy makers' perspectives and from practitioners, even from think tanks, and everybody looked at emerging issues from economic development perspective. When I say economic development, I'm referring to growth, transformation, employment creation, and food security. These are the issues critical for the African governments and critical for the African society. So anything emerging within this framework are looked at from this perspective. So when you look at climate change, I think there was a lot of debates and a lot of ups and downs on convincing the policymakers to embrace climate change agenda. And with a lot of work, and these days, I think I can say that most of the policymakers, even the development thinkers and planners, and all those involved within the governments and also non-government societies, climate change is considered as a critical issue because we observe a lot of damage and a lot of crisis and in front of our eyes and all these things. So I think it's well integrated. That's why many of the African countries, almost all, except one country, they have developed their nationally determined contributions. And so about half of them, they have also developed the national adaptation plans. So that means the agenda is well integrated. At continental level, we have also the climate change and resilience development, which have been approved by the African Unions. And also we have some additional strategies and at regional levels. So I think now the bioeconomy agenda is coming into the picture. So then how we can really, and at least at the experts level, we know that these two agendas are really converging because bioeconomy can provide a lot of opportunities for implementing some of the adaptation actions and also the mitigation actions sustainably. And it also provide us access for achieving some of the development objectives in terms of like creating jobs and all these things, because the bioproducts are really a good instrument for creating opportunities for employment. And at the same time, the climate agenda can also help to adopt the bioeconomy agendas, because bioeconomy climate initiatives comes with opportunities from the global initiative on finance and all these things. So those financial instruments and commitments can help to really adopt and enhance the bioeconomy practices within the communities, within the private sectors, and also all those things. However, there are so many issues that are not yet really clear and that are not yet convinced by the policymakers. But in order to brief these things, several things has happened. One of the things that we need is a knowledge procurement. In the opening ceremony, you have heard from my sister from Malawi that knowledge, awareness, and all those things are really critical in Africa. And we have to convince all the actors across the value chains. So for this one, Academia 2063, where I'm working in last year, and we wrote the annual trend and outlook report, which has been launched in Morocco last November. Is it November? Yes. So this is the official, the Comprehensive African Agriculture Development (CAADP) M&E platform. We publish every year, but last year we were covering on areas of how the African governments and policymakers can really leverage both bioeconomy and the climate change initiative, and this gives a good platform for discussion and among development thinkers and also governments and all these things. I think the global summit, which has happened in Africa for the first time, that also has created a lot of opportunities for Africans to think about it and for partners to think how really the bioeconomy agenda can be integrated to the development agendas of the African continent. So these are some of the knowledge activities that we are working. When it comes to the policy initiatives, I think Julius has talked about the first regional strategy has been developed for Eastern African communities. In addition to that, I think some countries are now developing their own bioeconomic strategies. South Africa and Namibia are the first two countries who have developed bioeconomy strategies in Africa. And more recently, I think it's at the end of last year, the last week of December, Ethiopia has approved the bioeconomic strategy immediately after the global summit. So these are some of the initiatives. And the other good happening policy initiative that has happened in Africa is the CAADP one. And the CAADP, I mean, you know, it has been started in 2003 with the Maputo declarations, and then that 10 years has in 2013, and the Malabo declaration have been approved in 2014, and now that 10 years have, and we have experience of 20 years, and then after 20 years, and we have some lessons that we learned, and we have to upgrade, have another one for 10 years, and now this has been drafted in the very participatory process, and we all have been playing a lot of roles on evidence-based policy process, and it has been approved last week. So the issue here is whether bioeconomy or climate change, how they have been treated in the CAADP strategy, in the new declarations. Bioeconomy is not directly mentioned, which is very unfortunate, but climate change has been a very, very hot topic. Among the 6 intervention areas that have been adopted by the head of states, resilience is one of them. In the resilience strategy, climate change become a forefront, and adaptation was mitigation, because agriculture is a big player for climate issues in Africa. So then I think this will be treated there, but bioeconomy still plays a lot of roles. In the Agenda 2063 for Africa, bioeconomy was considered as the key development pathway for Africa to sustain its economic growth. So these are the policy initiatives, but still we have to do a lot of activities and actions in terms of policy and research, especially on data. And data analysis, we have to convince the policymakers in terms of conceptualizing bioeconomy. And also, we have to generate some metrics and indicators how really countries can measure the contribution of bioeconomy for their overall economic transformation, employment, and all these things. So I think in terms of capacity building, because we have a lot of strategies and policies in Africa, but the rate of implementation is still a challenge. So that's where we have to build capacity in terms of techniques and finance. And finally, the private sector, especially for bioeconomy, is very critical. So these are some of just food for thoughts. I'm just repeating some of the ideas that have been raised during the opening ceremonies. But when you come to Africa, these are some of the critical contexts that we have been, and I hope the other panelists can also complement with this, and thank you for your attention. Okay. Yeah.
Well, let me ask the other panelists to join us here so that the two of us are not so lonely. Please take your seats here right with us. While they are walking up, please, shyness is not part of GFFA. Let me first follow up with a couple of questions to you and then turn to our other panelists. Let me push you a bit further on the potential of bioeconomy to achieve the CAADP ambitions. We will have a chance tomorrow to ask the Commissioner, hey, why is bioeconomy not mentioned in the new updated CAADP strategy? Leave that up to me. She is tomorrow on a panel which I chair. But so what can be done to support the CAADP ambitions through a bioeconomy pathway?
Yeah, thank you. I think from the CAADP policies, and I was very curious about how bioeconomy was treated in the programs and the intervention areas. So if you look at some of the intervention areas, there are 6 areas they have identified, we have identified, and that was part of the process. And then the first one is more focus has been given for this CAADP was agro-industrializations, agro-processing. So that's the #1 areas in addition to trade and also sustainable developments and all other things. So that is the way, I mean, it was mentioned in the strategy to fight about like hunger and malnutrition and all those things. So hopefully bioeconomy is one of the strategies, a pathway for agro-industrialization, not only really for creating jobs at small and medium enterprise levels, but also for nutrition. You know, one of the critical areas that was discussed in the strategy is malnutrition. So one of the strategy is just like having a circular bioeconomy to improve malnutrition and through different diversified food sources and all these things. So probably I think those are the areas, and even if it's not directly mentioned in the strategy, my hope is that during the implementation and domestication, and now the next phase is just to domesticate this strategy at country levels. So at country level, some of the country, especially those have these bioeconomy strategies, will hopefully adopt and also focus bioeconomy as a development pathway for agro-industrialization, at the same time for resilience, which is the last intervention areas within the strategy. So that's my hope. And I think one part is just, I want to say that, I mean, everybody was there last time we had a meeting in Morocco about when we launched this report, and the commissioner were there, and the director from the African Union were there. And then what he said is, convince me first, before I convince the 54 head of states to adopt bioeconomy. Can you really convince me? Give me the data. Where is the data? How much that really contributes?
So you were not convincing enough in Morocco?
We tried our best with the available evidence, but to be frank, I think the data we have is so fragmented, and some of them are just, we borrowed from Asia, maybe from Europe, all those things. So that was a challenge, but we tried our best to convince him. But those are the questions that are coming from the policymakers.
Yeah. I think that there may be another reason why the policymaker focus is still very much focused on a productivity agenda. Between 2014, a narrowly defined productivity agenda, I should have said. Between 2014 and 2018, African agriculture GDP grew at 4% per annum. In the last 5 years, that went down to 2.5% per annum. So there's a real concern that growth went down, and the sustainability aspects of that growth are questionable. So how can we best support governance and government for the bioeconomy at country level? What is Academia 2063 doing at that level?
Yeah, I think the first thing, as I said before, is conceptualization, understanding. We have to convince them. I mean, there are a lot of issues that have been raised, like why bioeconomy is different from regenerative agriculture, ecological agriculture, and a lot of issues are being raised. Is it something that is coming with additional inputs, or is it you are repeating the same things that we have been doing for many years? And there is also an intention, an idea in Africa that what we are already doing is the bioeconomy, because the farmers are already dealing with nature and all those things. But I think for policy purpose and for development purpose and for transformation purpose, we have to have a very consolidated and well-narrated and evidenced approach, even to upscale and also scale up the existing practice and all these things. With that perspective, Academia 2063 will try to, I think, generate some of the available evidence. And also one of the critical areas is we have to show that how much percentage of the GDP really is related to to bioeconomy and all those things. And then what are the critical areas where governments can leverage with the private sector? Bioeconomy, we learned that bioeconomy is more of the private sector involvement because it has industrialization, innovations, and biofuels and bioproducts, and all this requires investment. That investment should come from the private sector. So I think one area is just to develop data and analytics, and the other area is a policy dialogue among different actors, the private sector and the government and non-state actors. So we are trying to our best to bring all this together and understand. And at continental level, regional level, and at country level. Those are the strategies that we're trying to help the adoption and implementation of bioeconomy strategies in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being so concrete. Let me move on to my neighbor on the right. Colleagues, William Sutton is not on the screen, but he is in person here. He is a global lead for climate and nature at the World Bank. He is an agricultural economist who has recently issued a major research report and policy report related to climate issues, on which some of your statements will draw, I believe. Let me ask you, how does the World Bank engage in bioeconomy initiatives of emerging economies and facilitate related investments from a climate perspective in particular? Climate finance is so far mainly focused on mitigation, not on adaptation. From an Africa perspective, that needs to change, many of us feel. But what's your take? What does the World Bank do on bioeconomy? And how do you relate your climate agenda to the bioeconomy, the main topic of this conference?
Yeah, thanks very much, Professor. And I'm very happy to be here representing the World Bank. As you mentioned, we recently came out with the flagship report. It's a recipe for a livable planet, achieving net zero emissions in the agri-food system. It's the, as far as we know, the first comprehensive global strategy on achieving net zero emissions in the agri-food system. Related to your question, one of the points that we highlight in the report is just how little climate finance is going to agriculture and food. For the entire agri-food system, despite its importance for greenhouse gas emissions, 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions come from the agri-food system, despite its high vulnerability to climate change and how critical it is for livelihoods and food security. Only about 4% of climate finance has been going to agri-food every year. That's for both adaptation and mitigation combined, and the number is even lower on the mitigation side, only 2%. One of the reasons for producing this report is to raise awareness of this issue, this massive financing gap for climate action in the agri-food system. And we see a lot of overlap or synergies, if you will, between the bioeconomy agenda, biodiversity, and climate-smart agriculture. There are a number of concrete examples that the World Bank is supporting in Africa as well as elsewhere in the world. One example is agroforestry, which integrates trees with crops and enhances soil fertility, sequestration of carbon, and it provides habitats for biodiversity. In Africa, agroforestry can sequester 20 to 40 tons of CO2 per hectare every year while providing direct economic benefits to farmers. And in our Recipe for a Livable Planet report, we estimate that globally, agroforestry could deliver about 1 billion tons of CO2 equivalent in emissions reductions cost effectively. That's below $100 per ton every year. Similarly, there's silvopastoralism, which is essentially growing trees on pasture land. That's equally effective in terms of capturing and sequestering carbon. The silvopastoral systems have shown that they can produce more meat and milk of a better quality, restore degraded lands, and also reduce greenhouse gas emissions per head of cattle. And in particularly in Latin America, based on our experience, silvopastoral systems were found to sequester around 100 tons of carbon per hectare per year. So that's a couple of examples. In both cases, they use land more efficiently and also promote biodiversity. Another example which generates multiple wins is sustainable soil management. Different practices such as conservation agriculture have shown yield increases of 20 to 50% in drought-prone areas compared with conventional farming methods, and use of cover crops, which is one aspect of conservation agriculture, can increase yields by up to 30%. And moreover, these approaches also can increase the economic rate of return on investments. Soil health, for example, has been shown to increase the rate of return to smallholder farmers in East Africa by between $100 and $300 per hectare. So that's just a few of the examples.
Mm-hmm. Great. So you have already addressed a part of my second question to you. It does make business sense, apparently, to invest in bioeconomy. We have been working with partners on a map of agroforestry potentials in Africa recently. Lots of potentials, but as Norman Borlaug used to say, you know, the Green Revolution, Norman Borlaug, Peace Nobel Prize laureate, you cannot eat potentials, he kept saying. You have to realize it. How come that the investment is not forthcoming? There is since a long time these interesting plans to invest in agroforestry in the belt of the southern Sahel. A big project of the African Union. What would be the necessary next steps to bring these opportunities forward? And what role the World Bank can play?
Yeah, it's. I mean, based on our experience, it is a challenging question, and it's not a simple solution. I mean, there are a number of factors at play. I mean, for one thing, we need to increase the positive incentives for farmers to invest in these kinds of practices. What we find is that, you know, globally in general, but, you know, specifically in Africa, with the limited budgets that governments have, they're spending a lot of their public resources on subsidies for things like fuel and fertilizer that don't necessarily contribute to long-term sustainability or improved bioeconomy, and can even have negative environmental impacts. So, you know, instead, we promote an approach that we call repurposing, not reducing the support for farmers, but repurposing it instead of using it for those kinds of subsidies for you know, fossil fuels and things. Use it to promote more sustainable bioeconomy approaches of the sort that I mentioned: agroforestry, soil health, more sustainable use of water resources, and so on. Second is the financing. I mean, there's just a lack of financing for these things. A lot of as I mentioned, a lot of these approaches, they do generate higher rates of return for farmers, but that's not necessarily in year one or even year two. conservation agriculture, which includes minimum tillage. It takes time, often several years, before you start to really reap the benefits of those approaches. And so having, bridge financing to help farmers kind of bridge that gap until these investments become profitable, and also to help them, farmers, especially in places like sub-Saharan Africa, where they don't necessarily have access to commercial finance or significant savings, providing financing, concessional financing especially, so that they can make the investments up front is critical, and that's what we try to do through a number of our projects. And then, finally, knowledge and capacity building. Knowledge, first of all, how to obtain the financing, how to work with the banking system, but also how to apply these approaches, and sort of essentially teaching patients that, it takes a few years, but eventually these types of investments do pay off, I think is really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Please give a round of applause to William Sutton and the World Bank. There was a bioeconomy GFFA 10 years ago. None of you, actually I see 2 or 3 who may have been here 10 years ago. The big change since then is the World Bank is into bioeconomy. The World Bank is into climate. You were not, to a significant extent, 10 years ago. I was a neighbor of the World Bank, and your then president didn't use the word of climate change. So there is progress, and that's why I ask you for a round of applause to William Sutton and the World Bank. We need to stick to the finance topic, and this will be the case with our next speaker, Cecilia de la Sandro, head on sustainable food systems with ECDPM in Brussels, a think tank, a noteworthy think tank. And your topic is really climate finance. You're very much into that. Taking over from William, what can be done in order to leverage climate finance to move forward with food system transformation and bioeconomy?
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. And I think it's great to build on some of the insights from our colleague from the World Bank, because as you started saying, we have to look first at where are the climate finance flows currently going, so that data and evidence is crucial. And as part of the ATOR work, I've contributed a chapter where I was looking exactly at that, analyzing where the gaps are, both from the point of view of where climate finance is flowing, but also in terms of the sectors and in terms of the areas of work. As you said earlier, adaptation remains dramatically underfunded. And if we look at specifically at the African region, the situation is particularly dire. The region receives only 4.4 billion of climate finance, and the adaptation finance gap is about 78 billion annually. So we need a dramatic increase in climate finance. I was in Baku just a few months ago at COP29, and of course we've seen how developed nations have agreed on a new climate finance goal, to mobilize 300 billion annually by 2035. So this is a tripling of the previous 100 billion target, but this is still not enough. Many developing countries, many development nations have complained that it's still falling far short the 1.3 trillion needed annually. And so without specific commitments in addition to agri-food systems, I think we will not get the finance we need. And for what concerns adaptation, I think the point that was raised by William earlier, it's really what it takes time. Mitigation investments are easier. If I look at the European climate finance, for example, and the recent deals that Europe is making with different African countries, most of those are geared towards renewable energy, mitigation partnerships. It's easier, especially with middle-income countries, perhaps, and not so much looking at the most vulnerable, the poorest countries, because of this risk-return. Yes, the risk and returns of adaptation investments are simply not adding up at the moment, and you need a longer time horizon for investment. So what we looked at in the chapter was also the potential of blended finance approaches. So when we look not only at how to mobilize more climate finance, we need that for sure, but also looking at how you can leverage public and concessional finance, including from philanthropic capital, to bring in the private sector, because that's pretty clear. We will not achieve the goals of mitigation and adaptation in Africa only with public finance.
William mentioned that the food sector is responsible for about 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. A couple of years ago, UNEP, United Nations Environment Agency, came out with a number that the construction sector is responsible for about 38% of greenhouse gas emissions. The construction sector, because of steel, concrete, energy waste, and so on. Now, we talk bioeconomy here, not only food. So what can we do, more broadly speaking, to bring down these emissions in the economy beyond food?
I think bioeconomy is really interesting in the terms of offering both adaptation and mitigation co-benefits in many projects. It can also offer the possibility, I think, of bigger projects compared to some adaptation-specific projects in agri-food systems. And I think the issue of ticket sizes, I'm sure William can elaborate on that as well, is a challenge. So perhaps having larger projects in agroforestry, say, that achieve both adaptation and mitigation objectives can actually support, make it easier to bring in private investors as well. And for me, in addition, we have to look at also the policy side. I come from a think tank. We work a lot on policies, particularly. So it's not enough to look at which financing mechanisms exist out there, but also where is the enabling environment for that, and what are the key building blocks in this enabling environment. And policies and governance is one of them, where we need African countries, and many are already doing that, to develop their own strategies, but also cost them and be able to attach specific projects, a project pipeline out of, say, the national adaptation plans of different countries. And that often is not happening because they are very high-level, ambitious plans. That's one area. Regulatory frameworks is another area where there's a lot more work to do, as well as data and evidence and capacity building. Because accessing some of these funds, I think there's quite some good work also from the Malabo-Montpellier panel. There's a report that came out 2 years ago, ADAPT, that looked specifically at different countries, how they are changing their own systems internally, at the national level and at the subnational level, to be able to access certain climate funds. And then how do you trickle down that finance from the national level to the local level? I think that's the biggest challenge.
So maybe some of the trees which you, William, want the World Bank to see invested in need to get into the construction sector and thereby have lots of mitigation effects in transforming housing and construction in Africa, especially in low-cost housing, where so far a major construction problem exists. So we need to take a new look at quality biomass in Africa for mitigation and combine that with adaptation. Thank you, Cecilia. You will get the floor again, unless you want to add anything right now. Okay. Because the finance topic will remain with us. Let me come, however, to the demand side of the bioeconomy. Ebenezer Mise-Kwofi, Assistant Professor of Food System Sustainability and Resilience at McGill University in Canada, originating from Ghana, will talk to us about a nutrition-sensitive bioeconomy. Bioeconomy, we must watch it that we are not pushing too much only on the production side, but the quality of bioeconomy depends on the end products and the health outcomes. Ebenitzer, please tell us more how nutrition-sensitive bioeconomy interventions actually can look like.
Thank you for the opportunity to respond. I think in Africa, the big issues, one of them is nutrition. And when we start discussing bioeconomy, even the food system transformation, we put them in different buckets, in different silos. Nutrition, it's more for the health and nutrition people, and the production and all the other things are for the agriculture. And I think this is how we have done food systems over the last decades and have not found the solutions. But I think the bioeconomy discussion offers an opportunity both for environmental sustainability and nutrition. And I want to highlight a few things that showcase this is a possibility. The first one is enhanced nutrition security. And we know that in terms of agro-waste, bio-waste, usually we don't do anything with them, they just go waste. However, they could be used as, for example, substrate for functional foods, for example, micro-mineral supplements or protein powders. And if you look at the nutritional quality of some of these bio-waste compared to even the actual food products that we eat, there's a huge difference. 3 years ago, I worked together with some colleagues on an IFAD project in Zambia, Malawi, looking at the loss of material within the value chain, either from waste or from just losses in general. And we quantified the nutritional quality, and we realized that it's more than half the actual product that is sold on the market. So what it basically means that we are throwing things that would enhance our nutrition. But considering the minor nutritional or malnutrition in Africa, it's usually microminerals, zinc, iron, and then sometimes protein. But if you look at the opportunities that these bioeconomy present, and I'll give you a typical example. Let's say edible mushroom. Edible mushroom has iron up to 88 milligram per 100 gram dry matter, compared to all the actual food that, let's say, beef, chicken, all of them, they have up to only 5 grams, milligrams per 100 grams. So if you compare 5 grams compared to up to 88 milligram, there is an opportunity there. But we can apply the waste and grow these edible mushroom. So that's one. The second one is that it also creates the economic and environmental opportunity. So all these waste that would end up in landfills, if they are used in the production of these functional foods. Now we solve the environmental issue that are connected with the waste being on the landfill, but we also solve the economic issue because these protein powders are not only used for food, but they also create opportunity for them to be sold. And the other thing is, it also brings about accessibility, because the waste will end up on the landfill, but if they're used for as a bioeconomy pathway, we grow edible insect, we grow edible mushroom, we grow all of these. Now, because it can be grown on people's backyard, So relying on export of food would go down because local people can do this in their backyard and get access to nutritious food. But if we scale it up where we're actually doing this on relatively larger production, then it also becomes available even for those in the urban cities. So there's that economic opportunity and accessibility for to solve the issue of malnutrition. The other one that I also want to highlight is that once we engage communities in these nutrition-sensitive circular economy pathways, you're talking about education. Now people become aware of it, and so the knowledge of nutrition and environmental sustainability becomes part of the community, because now they are engaged, they find the solution to be localized because it is their own and they can do it by themselves. That creates knowledge, because we know that the issue of knowledge around bioeconomy, it's with the people doing the research. The local people, the informal sector, that information is not available. So that community engagement will bring about the benefit from a nutrition perspective, but also from an environmental sustainability perspective. And then finally, if we can convert all the food loss and food waste into products that have nutritional value, we are transitioning not only in terms of environmental sustainability, but also we are converting that waste and converting them into food that are available for consumption. And so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ebenezer. Let's do a brief opinion poll. Who had consumed insect-based food in the audience? I did. Okay, not so bad, not so bad. And you follow Ebenezer's suggestion, have your mushroom today, but dry matter, that's quite a pile of mushrooms. And you can leave the spinach on the side. But Ebenezer, I need to follow up with one quick question and a brief answer from you. Is this business for smallholder farmers in Africa, or is this industry?
Good question. So this has an opportunity both for localized industry and then also for scale up. From the localized, because it can be done by individual households, so there's an opportunity there for even local households to produce something that can be sold on the local market. But from the broader perspective, it also has a scale-up potential. And so if we're producing this on a large scale, then it becomes available also for urban cities.
Okay. Very well. Colleagues, you have listened to this interesting panel. You have heard Africa policy directions, head of state meeting just a week ago, and the ministers launching an updated CAADP strategy. You have heard of investment opportunities, transforming the food system so that it is more resilient and climate friendly. You have heard about finance. You have heard about nutrition. In the meantime, you have prepared your questions, I'm sure. There are microphones here in the room, and so please raise your hand or walk right to the microphone. I see a hand up there. Please fetch the roaming microphone and address your question to the panel or an individual on the panel, or make your point. Feel a panelist.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Emma Jordan from the Alliance Biodiversity International in CIAT. It's one of the CGIAR research centers. My question is going to all of you. I'm missing terms like agroecology, social transformation. resilient. Participation, I'm missing biodiversity as a term when it comes to meeting nutrition security. And I'm missing horticulture as one of the missing economy in agriculture production on the African continent, looking at the very, very low rates of consumption because of the low wealth status. So I'm wondering how this goes into all your comments so far, looking at the CAADP declaration, which is talking about at least 30% of agricultural land under sustainable management and 40% of households protected from shocks by 2035. So I'm wondering whether these aims are much too low, looking into what we are losing currently in terms of land, looking into who is doing our ecosystem services in the African continent, which are very low-income farmers who are not paid. And they are trying to fetch water using sometimes 4 and 5 hours to at least plant one tree, which we have lost many times in the last years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So these very important concepts and agenda items are no longer missing in the room because you brought them up. You broadened our agenda appropriately. We will come back to those points. Next question, please. Let's add 2 or 3, and then we go back to the panel. Please, here's a hand up right here.
Thank you. So my name is Lucky. I'm from Madagascar. I'm an entrepreneur and also an activist on climate change. So thank you for all the presentations. I just have, so it's a question, it's a recommendation, it's something, yeah, you can take it as you want. I think that one of the biggest issues is that we don't know how much it will cost to make the transition into the actual model, economic models that we have now, and models that are based on bioeconomy. And if you don't have this argumentation, if you don't have enough proof and evidence about it on these topics, it will be very difficult for us to change the mind of our decision makers. So, what organizations like Academia 2063 or the World Bank or also the think tank can make? What are the projects that are, what are your projects to give more evidences on the cost of transitioning? Yeah.
Great question. And you pointed already to 2 members on the panel who will respond in a moment. More questions, please. There's one. And thereafter I come back to the panel.
Yes, my name is Nikan Rodongo, working with the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT. Food security is for sure one of the challenges in Africa and has been rightly pointed out by one of the panelists. However, some of the strategies that the panelist has proposed in trying to as a solution, for example, insect or mushroom. And I liked the question that how many in this room have had an insect food. I think it would be important to develop such strategies in consultation with the communities to which you want to implement them, because then insect is growingly becoming an important source of protein, but many communities still don't accept that as food. So if intervention is aimed at probably promoting that, then it may lack the consumer. Again, mushroom, probably you work in African countries and probably you hardly see it. So it really needs informed intervention to make sure that those will actually be adopted by the communities that you work or you promote them in. Thank you.
Thank you for this point. As you are from CIAT Bioversity, let me add an opinion poll. Who of you in the audience have eaten beans last week? Thank you. Are you satisfied? So they are not only insects, they are very much into your leading crop, of CIAT at least. Colleagues, Getau, there was a hidden critique of the CAADP updated agenda, and especially not the agenda actually, but the lack of implementation. Would you comment on that? The missing key concepts which our first intervention was addressing to. The microphone is always on. Go ahead. Yeah. Speak. Don't hit it.
I think some of the things that
Maybe you hit it too much.
Okay, now it's working. Okay. Agroecology, this biodiversity, which is very, very critical. Yes, it's already mentioned. I mean, we miss it from our presentation, but it's not yet missed from the CAADP. It's already included in the CAADP. It's considered as one of the high agenda, actually, because it contributes for agriculture productivity and sustainability and all those things. So I think horticulture is also among the priority commodities that have been mentioned and in all of the intervention areas. So those are, I think, sorry for missing from our presentation, but they are not missing. But agroecology, I'm not sure about it, but I think we can further discuss about it. And there are some discussions about how really best integrate into our development agendas and all those things. How different is it from other sustainability concepts and all those things. But more important is about your concern about the land under sustainable land management, 35%. That is the target that was set. I mean, in the Malabo declarations, there was a target. Many of the African countries, they promised to double the area under sustainable land management. It was 100% actually. And with the BR, you know, the biennial review and all those processes, we have been following up, tracking the numbers. I think none of the countries have achieved. Only a few countries, maybe 1 or 2 countries have achieved those things. So there was a lot of debates, and maybe the target is too much and all these things. And now this time, I think they want to make the target more realistic and have a 35% sustainability share, I mean, the area. And also think about the numbers. If you are just increasing from 1 to 2, then it's 100%. But if you are increasing from 50 to 51, it's very, very one. So I think that the areas under sustainable land management in some countries is, in terms of volume, is very high. Now the rate of increase has to be lower than before. That's also the agreement, the arrangement. In any way, that's very, very critical issues. And when it comes to implementation, that's where the challenge is. I mean, target is always, for example, since the Maputo Declaration, and governments have promised to allocate 10% of their total expenditure for agriculture. But recently, especially after COVID-19, I think only few countries, and led by Ethiopia, which is my country, they allocated 10%, but most of them, they didn't appreciate. And that creates another round of problem in the implementation of the targets, like the 6% growth rate in agriculture, and zero hunger reductions, and all those things are not really yet achieved. It's only Rwanda who achieved the nutrition target, for example. So those are just because of so many things that has happened. It's partly because of the global shocks, and both the Ukraine-Russia crisis has also contributed, and the COVID-19 has also contributed. And the change of leadership, political commitment in Africa is very critical. That's what we learn, because whenever there is a leadership change and the rate of implementation, the commitment and all those things goes down. So those are the things that I think critical for African perspective. I think for the others can comment on those things.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to ask Cecilia and you, William, to address the question of the economics of transition, the cost of transitioning. If a German farmer who is a conventional farmer, for instance, wants to transit to eco and bio product production, this requires an investment of a number of years until certifiable products can be sold in the bio market, which may facilitate fetching a higher price. So it's for real. There is transition costs exist, but can you say something about that? Both of you, let's start with Cecilia. Any good studies from ECBTM on transition financing?
Thanks. That's a very good question. So I don't think it's our role to provide the very comprehensive data that is needed to actually cost the transition. I think there's bigger organizations like the World Bank that do this kind of reports. Perhaps two things. I mean, on the cost itself, I've looked more at the aspect of adaptation. And I think on that side, perhaps more than bioeconomy yet, there is more research and data that is actually showing the cost of inaction as opposed to the benefits of investing. So in that sense, yeah, you need to have the right data and the right knowledge to be able to prove both to policymakers and to the private sector that making those investments make financial sense. For bioeconomy, perhaps our colleague William can say more. But maybe one small addition from my side, because we look a lot at this topic of transition, more from a point of view also of political economy. I think we need to look also not just at the costing technical exercise, but what is needed to actually politically achieve it. Because if I look at, I live in Brussels, I've had farmers' trucks going under my door every day, because we also have set targets within Europe to make changes in terms of sustainable land use, organic production, and so forth. And that has a cost that is, that is having certain repercussions on the farmers. So I think whatever framework you set technically, you need to look at who are the winners and losers and how do you compensate the losers, how do you accompany certain policy changes. Otherwise, you can make all the technical analysis out there, but yes, the political will not be there to actually support the changes and the transition. That's my contribution.
Yeah, we definitely need to look at two types of costs. One is the business costs for the investor, the farmer or the corporation. And secondly, the total cost to society. Not producing sustainably has a tremendous health, environmental, biodiversity, land use, land quality, etc. costs to whole of society. So what can you say about the cost aspect of transitioning to what is the recipe? Planet. What's the cooking of the recipe for the livable planet costing?
Yeah,
I was ridiculing your title, but please give a serious
answer. The price on the menu. No, I'm glad you asked, because actually we do come up with an estimate globally for the cost of the transition. It's a big number. We estimate that it would require about $260 billion a year globally. That's to get us essentially on a track to net zero by 2030. However, a couple of things. First of all, we look at that in terms of, how can we get there to net zero most cost effectively? And a lot of the measures that can be taken, not only do they cost less than $100 per ton, many of them actually, 20 to 30% cost less than zero. In other words, they save money. So, talking about your insects and your beans, I mean, change of diets. If, eating less meat from ruminants, which is, you know, the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions from the agri-food system. We're not in the business of telling people what to eat, but if you let the prices reflect their true cost for production and to society, and let people, you know, choose, more people would likely choose to eat other things. And it doesn't mean, you know, necessarily becoming a vegetarian. Even switching from beef to pork or from beef to chicken significantly reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Switching, of course, to leguminous crops is even a much more significant reduction in emissions, and it costs a lot less money. So it's, you know, it would be cheaper for society. There are a lot of countries, not so much in Africa, but in other countries, farmers actually overuse chemical fertilizers because they, you know, they don't know how much to apply, when to apply it, where to apply it, what type to apply. And so there's, in some countries, particularly middle-income countries, there's a large overuse, especially of nitrogen fertilizers. And, you know, instead of contributing to crop growth, it goes into the atmosphere in the form of greenhouse gases, nitrous oxide. It pollutes waterways and contributes to eutrophication and so on. Obviously, overusing fertilizer less, you know, using less fertilizer, using it in an optimal way, the right kind of fertilizer and so on, it actually saves farmers money, saves society money, and reduces negative environmental externalities. So $260 billion a year of investments, but we estimate that that can generate approximately $4.3 trillion a year in benefits in terms of economic benefits, environmental benefits, health benefits. So essentially a 16-to-1 return on investment in mitigation and the agri-food system.
Wow, 16-to-1. Thank you for sharing these numbers. I'm sure you gave me, by the way, a little card where the logo gives you right away access to this extremely interesting report. So maybe on the way out you can corner William to give you also this little card. William, we need to talk about energy. Energy in relation to bioeconomy in Africa. And Getao, maybe you can also come in on that. There are still many African countries who derive more than 50% of primary energy from biomass. Wood burning, charcoal in particular. It's not from coal, oil, and let alone wind or solar. What's the strategy to bring down this waste? We talk about food waste and losses. This wasting of biomass for burning. What's your strategy, and does your report say something about that? And how to finance the energy transition in a more bio-based or bioeconomic, because it's bio-diseconomics to burn all this biomass. Getao, maybe you can come to that in a moment, but William first.
Yeah. So a great question. I mean, first of all, just to note that, you know, if you look at the agri-food system, the use of renewable energy is much lower than in other sectors, and that's something that I think we need to address, and it could be addressed in part from waste from farming and food. Using agricultural waste to produce energy, you know, for example, biogas production from animal and crop waste can improve farm sustainability and also reduce methane emissions, which is another very powerful greenhouse gas. We have a couple of examples of that the World Bank is supporting. One in Uganda, small-scale biogas systems in rural areas have reduced household expenditures on firewood by 30 to 40%, which equates to an annual savings of about $150 to $300 per household. That's in Uganda. And in Namibia, converting invasive bush species into biomass energy has generated an annual income of between $1,000 and $2,000 per participating farmer, and helped to protect native biodiversity. So there you go. And I did mention biodiversity a few times earlier. It also supports electricity production for over 20,000 households. So those are you know, a couple of examples that you know, we're actually putting into practice. But those kinds of things you know, really need to be scaled up on a much larger scale.
Thank you. Gittau, on energy.
Yes. In one of the chapters that we have in the ETOR, in our report, is energy transition, sustainable energy transition in Africa. And in that one of the chapter, I think the professors were exploring the challenges that we are facing for Africans. As Professor said, 50% and even more than that is coming from biomass consumptions and firewoods and all these things. This has a lot of implications, not only on the environment, but also on health aspects, and because of smokes and all these things. So, I mean, usually, currently, the best and the most widely practiced strategy in Africa is just energy-saving technologies, expansion of energy-saving technologies, where we can at least reduce the biomass consumption. That is the first step. And that can easily be adopted by rural households and all those things, and reducing the consumption. And the transition is the second stage. And in that transition, I think there are a lot of options, electrifications, and also adoption of the sustainable energy sources, including solars and all those things, and also the biofuels, the additional ones. So in those things, I think the challenge we are facing is those who are adopted, have access for this type of new technologies, are a little bit better off. And there are people and households at the lower income groups who will be left aside. And then we are advocating for a just transition. A just transition means a transition that can include everybody to adopt all those inclusive technologies. So the finance should come from the public sector, because there are also infrastructure developments that are required. And also, I mean, it's also a good investment, especially for solar technologies, by the way, is just like the private sector now in some African countries. It's just highly being expanded, and wind technologies as well. And so those are, I think, this might be one of the most important and attractive, possibly in terms of business, feasible areas for private-public partnerships. So energy could be one of the areas where both private and public partnership could be the most feasible one. So those might be the areas. But what's important for our energy transition in Africa is just we have to be just transition. That's what the chapter was trying to address. Yeah.
Okay. The first intervention from the floor rightly argued about inclusivity. Let's be inclusive. As I currently don't see a hand up, let me ask a question to the audience. I see Matthias Mogge here. Matthias Mogge, the chief executive of WHH, Germany's largest NGO, Welthungerhilfe. You have lots of programs in African countries. How does bioeconomy figure in your programs, Matthias? Fetch your mic. And I will continue asking in the audience if you don't ask us.
It's me, he's
Go
referring
ahead.
to me. You're absolutely right. We have many, many programs. And I would say that particular bioeconomy does not figure enough in these programs, because we are very, very focused on food production, processing, etc., etc. But taking the bioeconomy agenda deliberately into the programming is not taking place enough. And also seeing the food energy nexus, for example, I would say there is still room for improvement. But I mean, as we know and as we have heard the examples here today, I would say yes, there is a lot of potential, actually, to include all these bioeconomy aspects in the programming to achieve food security, food and nutrition security, I have to say.
Thank you. There's a hand coming up. Otherwise, I would have pointed a trade question to a colleague. Please go ahead and introduce yourself briefly and ask your question.
Yes, I do. My name is Sophia Baumert. I'm working for GFFA based in Kenya. Thank you for the discussion and presentations. Actually, it sounds all very familiar to me. And, but still, I do not have an answer to the question that you, Tadessa, referred to at the beginning, that your partners you're working with, the governments, are asking. Where's the difference? Why do we need a bioeconomy agenda on top of what we are doing? We are doing insect cultivation, we are eating beans, we are working on renewable energy. So why do we need a bioeconomy agenda additionally? So when now I am going back to Kenya and approaching my partner in the Ministry of Agriculture, I still struggle to find convincing arguments. Why should they now have a work on the bioeconomy agenda? And is it actually the Ministry of Agriculture who should do it? Who should do it? Whom should I bring together to create impetus for a bioeconomy agenda? So I'm still really struggling, and maybe you could try to answer or give me some really strong arguments without repeating what has been said. Thank you.
Okay. You have registered that one. Any other question at this juncture? Or Getau, please take this one on.
Yeah, I'm also struggling. I'm also struggling to get really a very convincing argument for policymakers to embrace bioeconomy. Bioeconomy, I think the concept might be coined, looks like new, but the practice, the actual practice is already there. As you said, we eat, insects, not very much, but we eat beans. Yeah, so I think the idea here is, to me, I usually advocate on agricultural transformation, commercialization, and all these things. So bioeconomy has a lot of opportunities inside. Like, for example, biotechnology is one of the aspects, innovation. Biotechnology is one of the aspects of that. But that innovation has to be really good for the environment and good for our activities and productivity and all those things. And the other one is the issue of bioproducts. This bioproducts requires processing, just agro-processing, but with bioproducts and with bioresources and all these things. So it's just a matter of bringing all these opportunities together to help our own agricultural transformation process. So we have an agricultural process that is happening over years, but that process has to be environmentally friendly and socially inclusive and all these things. So bioeconomy concept by itself can provide those opportunities. That is the idea, and conceptually, and also looking at some possibilities. Some raw materials are already there, biological resources. So most of our agricultural products, they are biological resources. Those biological resources can be transformed with job creations and with all involvement. So bioeconomy, for me, is just a way of thinking differently. So it gives us opportunity to continue our own activities that we are doing so far, but with environmental concern, with climate action into it, and all those things. That is the only conceptual analysis I have. Probably we have to do more research and get some more specific data and how much this bioeconomies really can contribute for job creations and in productivity impact, and how much will be the productivity impact. Biodiversity issue is also another important issue. So I think that is the way of thinking that I'm getting from the past 1 year where I start to engage in this bioeconomy discussions and agenda. So still we are, because the concept is evolving over times, and for some people might be it's getting matured, but for some of us still we are struggling to conceptualize and also the challenge comes with our own perception on how African agriculture development is just framed. So how to really integrate this new concept into that. That's all the things. And the other thing, there was also one additional question, but I forgot.
Okay, let me...
Who should... Institutional arrangement, that's where the challenge comes in. And currently in Africa, it's based in Ministry of Science and Technology. Those are the challenges. And those are the ministers who are advocating. And those are the ones who are developing the strategies. And the Ministry of Agriculture still is being challenging. And but for us, as a research institute, we are advocating that just like climate change, it's a multi-sectoral intervention. So everybody has to involve. In any way, someone has to lead. Probably the Ministry of Science and Technology might be the right institution to lead, but others, especially agriculture, environment minister, and also trade and industry ministers, and all those can contribute. Just like we have this climate change working groups in every country, so we can have the bioeconomy technical working groups. At least from the experience I know from Ethiopia, it's just led by the Science and Technology Ministry.
Okay. Let me welcome Julius Ekuru. Julius, we have just had a question on which Geta was elaborating from a colleague from GIZ, the German Development Agency, from Kenya. What do I say to whom in order to convince that bioeconomy is a good thing to invest in and to focus on? Well, at the Bioeconomy Summit in Kenya, we had lots of senior policymakers who were very convinced that this is a good thing to invest in. But not everyone needs to be or was convinced. Secondly, what should be the governance structure of bioeconomy? Which minister shall I talk to? On that one, my answer is easy. Bioeconomy is not a sector. If you come with a sector perspective, you are doomed. Bioeconomy relates to every sector of the economy. It's part of the transformation. That's why the European bioeconomy strategy 10 years ago really was a strategy embracing all commissions. That's why the Chinese bioeconomy strategy and the US bioeconomy strategy, funded with billions of dollars, are at the center of government and decentralized at the province level. That's why currently still, as Gettau said, in most countries, the lead is in a combination between head of state and the science ministry and the economics ministry, not the Ministry of Agriculture. And the Ministry of Agriculture, you usually got the response, we do it already, everything. What are you telling us? We are dealing with trees, with insects, with soils, and so on. So, Julius, this was to fill you in and to ask you to go to the podium and say a few remarks from where is bioeconomy strategy headed in Africa, what will be appropriately next steps, and how to relate to the climate agenda. This is what this panel is about. Please take the floor. And colleagues, I saw a few more hands, but I'm afraid we need to get Julius done, and then our session is over.
Okay, thank you so much, Joachim and the panel. Apologies for coming a bit late.
Everyone knows that Julius is the co-chair of the International Advisory Council on Global Bioeconomy. He was the lead person to launch the East African Economic Community's bioeconomy and the mastermind of the African Bioeconomy Summit.
Yeah. Thank you, and I think I will pick it from there. So the way we are now looking at bioeconomy is as an opportunity to leapfrog into the future type of growth. And the reality is 80% of people in Africa are still in, subsistence, rural agriculture. But also agriculture produces more than 60% of the biomass that should go into the bioeconomy. So when we talk about inclusivity, when you talk about economic empowerment, this is the area to intervene. And innovation gives us the chance to do that. So to add to that is the issue of climate. So a lot of people argue that, Africa, we are low emitters and so on. But I think the climate action and the momentum created in addressing climate issues is an opportunity for Africa and for bioeconomy to take us to that future. I think addressing issues of cleanup later on, if we follow the old economic model, will be more expensive than if we made the interventions of bioeconomy right now. So that's really where we look at. And in climate, relating it to climate, maybe you have discussed this, but in climate we talk about mitigation, adaptation. But for adaptation and mitigation to work, we also need to look at the supply chains and make those also very resilient. So 3 points I want to leave you with. Number one is policy dialogues to crack the right incentives to promote bioeconomy, or if you like, sustainable practices, sustainable industrialization. That's for me one, and I think what we are doing here is one of those. The second thing, I think, for most of Africa would be developing what we would call bioeconomy clusters based on innovation. And the biomass I talked about need biorefineries. So if we can crack that, and these biorefineries can be very, very good off-takers of produce or production from different farms. So that is one thing. And also the clusters help to strengthen the supply chains, because you have the private sector, you have the government, you have academics, and so on. And these clusters can be linked from the local level to the regional level, and also to global value chains. Then lastly is the issue of knowledge production and exchange. I think the panel I had, the issues of data and how we monitor this. But aside from that, we also have certain indigenous practices, like considering bioindicators for climate. I think communities have certain bioindicators that they can help to monitor. When we think about birds, certain type of birds, amphibians or insects or ants, they can be very good bioindicators. So when we talk about knowledge production, knowledge exchange, and involving the communities, then I think they can play an important part in the climate action agenda. So lastly, my take-home is bioeconomy really is an opportunity for us to leapfrog into that economy of the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Julius. And panelists, colleagues, there are so many more of these workshops tomorrow. For instance, one which addresses more comprehensively the last question, why bioeconomy, with whom, how to implement, and so on. Panel number 7 tomorrow morning right away at 9:30. And a series of other panels, and use the opportunity to critically discuss and review what you hear from the front and be part of the debate on the way forward. Thank you for coming to this panel.